Let's talk about the mismatch between COGS and revenue, which can happen in DIA inventory. It can happen in any perpetual inventory system, actually, but I'm going to talk about DIA inventory and how we can fix it. Got lots of letters after my name, so you have some idea that I know what I'm talking about. I hope that's convincing. So this is an example of the report we will eventually get to. This is a report in Zoho Analytics using the GrowthPath connector between DIA inventory and Zoho Analytics. Now, this connector can also be connected to other data warehouse systems, but I'm using Zoho Analytics because I think it's a pretty good solution. So this is an example of the detail that underlies the calculation. So you can see that it's calculating it at order line level, and it's calculating for every SKU the difference in quantity as of a certain cutoff date. So the cutoff date here is the 31st of October. And it then gives a valuation to the excess quantity, and the total of these figures will be the revenue, which isn't matched by cost of goods sold as of the cutoff date. But before we look at that, let's have a little bit more of a discussion about what we're talking about. Only a few slides, I promise. So the issue is that cost of goods sold comes from the shipment transaction, and revenue comes from authorized invoices, and they can have different dates. And those dates can be in different months. And if you're doing month-end reporting, it could mean that you end up reporting revenue without any margin impact because there's no cost of goods sold. Margin will be overstated in that case, and it also leads to some concerns about revenue recognition, particularly if you're being audited, and particularly at the end of the financial year. Now, DIA's reporting doesn't make this very easy to fix, and it's further complicated by DIA's flexibility, where you can have multiple invoices and multiple shipments. To do it with DIA's reporting, you need to do multiple reports, some getting COGS detail, some getting revenue detail, linking them together, and then in Excel, basically, with VLOOKUPs and so on. And then you've still got the problem that you can't extract more than 365 days of data. The most robust way to do this calculation is to process all of sales history every time. That way you know you're capturing everything. And believe it or not, that actually is very, very fast if you've got it in a good database. So in Zoho Analytics, for instance, this calculation takes not even seconds. But of course, doing it manually in DIA takes hours, or at least an hour and a half, I guess, depending on how complex the business is. But it's a nuisance. So the technical concept for finding out the overstated revenue figure, or the mismatched revenue figure, is, first of all, we take a cutoff date. It might be the date of the last period that you're reporting on. We have to find the difference in quantities, and we have to give that a value. And this has to be done at order line, and it has to be smart enough to consolidate across SKUs, because it's possible that you have invoiced multiple times in an advanced order, and you might even have used a different net price on different invoices. It's unlikely, but it's possible. So we want to consolidate per SKU to get the accurate figures, the average revenue figure. And we need this to happen for all of sales history, because if we say I'm only going to look at orders in, let's say, the last 365 days, what do you do about orders which 365 days ago were part of this problem? They were open but not yet invoiced. So the problem with arbitrary cutoff dates is you're always going to have some uncertainty about whether you've got errors due to invoices which were incomplete at the point of the cutoff. So it's much better to do this for all of sales history, and it doesn't present a technical problem. It does present a problem with DIA's built-in reporting, but it doesn't really present a technical problem with the performance of the reporting. Once we've calculated that, we book an accrual. A reversing month-end journal is the way to go. Now, I'm only going to look here at the problem where we've got revenue without shipments, but the report that I'm going to show you in analytics is capable of doing it the other way around. Okay, that is the shipments which are missing revenue. Okay, it's a separate figure, and you could accrue for that as well if you want to. So now we'll have a look at analytics. So I've jumped into Zoho Analytics for the GrowthPath sandpit or test environment. Now the sandpit environment has messy data with strange dates, including future dates. It's used for all kinds of purposes, including load testing and zero, and clients like to use it to experiment with configurations and so on. Despite the data being a bit crazy, I can see that this report is showing me that there are examples of quantities where for the cutoff date, which I think is set to the 31st of October, we'll go and check that in a minute. For the cutoff date, oh, there it is. I've put it here in the report already, 31st of October. So for that cutoff date, we do have data which is showing us that there are instances where we have invoiced quantities which are not yet shipped. Now this dear link column will actually take me to the relevant order in Dear, and we could verify that if we wanted to. I'll just wait for Dear to load. So this happens to be a simple sale. So it's clear right away that we have an authorized invoice and we don't have any shipment. Okay, so it's clear right away that this one must be an example. There's not even a question of timing. The shipment simply hasn't been completed. So we can see the calculation provides a difference in quantity, and it multiplies that by the average selling price. Now, it's also possible that there might be COGS values. So to access the excess COGS, I just flip over the filters like this here, and we'll see if we've got some examples. So here we've got 63 units, which as of the cutoff date had been shipped, and the invoice wasn't authorized at this point. Now the COGS value is valued at the average COGS of the order, which can be the estimated COGS if there's no shipment, or in the case of a shipment, it'll be the actual COGS. Now the underlying data for this is provided from the Dear API. Attached to every sales order document, Dear has a transaction history for the sale, and that data is captured by the GrowthPath connector, and it is processed and manipulated in such a way that each of those transactions is linked to a source document, and that provides a table which is called in the tables, it's called the inventory transaction table. Sales order inventory transactions. So this table is the raw data for the report. So in this database, I only have 25,000 rows of data, but I've run this report with hundreds of thousands of rows. Zoho Analytics is quite capable of processing that very quickly. Now, the cutoff date could be updatable in SQL, but to try and make it a little bit friendlier, I've designed this report in a slightly different way. I've got a table here called special report parameters, which is kind of a workaround for the problem with Zoho Analytics that we can't provide kind of variables or parameters into underlying SQL. So the user would just choose this field and change the cutoff date, like September 30th, and we save those changes. And the query underlying this report will look up that table and change it. So you can see that was very fast to change once I click the refresh button properly. Let's try that again just to make sure. I want to be convincing with how fast it is. So let's change it. Let's change it to August the 31st. I save the changes in this table. Go back to this report and click the refresh button. Stop it. Changing the cutoff date. The report here has some SQL underneath it, which has the cutoff date embedded in it. But to avoid people having to edit the SQL, I've actually created a second table which is referred to in the SQL called special report parameters. So if you change this date to some other cutoff date, let's say July 31st, save my changes, and go back to the query. When I refresh this report, it will change to reflect the new cutoff date. For some reason, I have to hit the refresh button once and twice. Only on the second time does the SQL notice that I've changed the date. But you can see that was very quick. There was 25,000 rows of data which was processed, and it processed in a second. Works on large data sets also just about as quickly because an analytics tool is not phased by a few 100,000 rows of data. So there is no real computational problem with running this over all of sales history once you've got all of sales history. And that's a big advantage of the connector. In this table, we have everything. Okay, all of sales history is here. So that's how we do that, this report. So I'm going to make a second video explaining how this report is built, because it's an interesting question for someone who wants to get into advanced use of the Deer Analytics Connector and Zoho Analytics. But for the purpose of an end user, we can simply copy and deploy this report to anyone who has the Analytics Connector up and running, certainly with Zoho, because it's very easy to copy reports from one workspace to another workspace, and you can basically be up and running with it right away. But if you want to know how it works, stay tuned for a second video.